Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Anthony.
And this is Words and Numbers. I'm so happy that it's Thanksgiving, I'm not even going to insult you.
This is one of my favorite holidays.
It's my absolute favorite holiday, but we'll get to that in a minute.
One of our listeners sent me an article. This was from the New York Times, and the gist of it was if you spend $1,000 on a new smartphone, that's the equivalent of, and they named a number like $17,000 that could have otherwise been sitting in your retirement fund. And the way they do that is by, making assumptions that there's so many years until you retire, you get so much interest. And if you'd put that $1,000 into your retirement fund instead of spending it on a smartphone, you'd end up with $17,000. That's fine. The numbers work, give or take. But it got me thinking about a lecture that I give to high school students. Often I'm asked to give lectures on personal finance. Of course, being high school students, the thing they want to hear is how do you become a millionaire? I emphasize that there's just two ingredients you need. And all of us have these two ingredients. And the reason we aren't all millionaires is because we don't use them, right? But they're two very simple ingredients.
Yeah, I no longer have one of them, though.
Right. Yeah. This is the irony. By the time you figure out what they are, one of them's gone. The two ingredients are discipline saving and time. I run them through the numbers, and I forget about not even a middle-class person. Take a person who graduates high school and goes immediately into the job market. And I'm going to use average figures here. So the average person in the United States who is a high school graduate at age 18 can expect to earn, in this first year of work, $23,500. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at this person in each year of the person's life and look at the amount that people with high school educations of those various ages make. For example, at 25, the average high school educated worker in the U.S. earns $37,000, almost $38,000. By age 45, that's gone up to $51,000, and it kind of hangs there until the person retires. So I'm going to use the actual numbers for actual Americans who actually have only a high school diploma. Now, here's the thing. Let's suppose this person starts saving immediately at age 18. That's the time part. The person's going to save starting that early in life. And here's the discipline saving part. The person's going to save 15% of his wages. Now, that sounds like a lot, particularly if you're starting out at $23,000. But we're talking about becoming a millionaire, right? This is not going to be painless, but it's doable. 15% of your pay, whether it's high, whether it's low, you save 15%. And you invest this at 7% interest after inflation. So that's roughly putting all your money into a diversified portfolio of stocks. Again, this is imminently doable. Some years you'll get more, some years you'll get less, but on average, 8 to 12% on equities is reasonable. Now, here's how this works. You track these numbers, and by the time this person reaches age 58, he's a millionaire. And that's a millionaire adjusted for inflation. So he's a millionaire as we today would call it a millionaire.
God, I need a time machine.
Isn't this incredible? And if the person keeps working to age 70, he's worth $2.4 million in today's terms.
And if you have done that, we're looking for a sponsor, and you should get in touch with us right now.
But here's the thing. So I'll say to students, look, people are hard on millionaires and saying, they have privilege and this and that. And, I don't deny that in particular cases. But the fact is, this is a path that's open to everybody. Is it difficult? Of course it's difficult. We're talking about becoming a millionaire, but it's not impossible. And if it's not impossible for someone with simply a high school diploma, it's even more possible for everybody else.
And when you really sit back and ask yourself what this means, it means not eating out as much. It means not grabbing a coffee at the Starbucks. A friend of mine bought tickets for his son to go see Kanye West. Those tickets cost $200 each. That's the kind of stuff you don't do if you want to be a millionaire. You can still live pretty well. You just can't live high off the hog.
That's absolutely right. And you might say to yourself, well, but I want these things. I want the tickets. I want to go get my Starbucks every day or whatever it is. And that's fine. Just understand what the cost is. And don't complain come age 50 that you're not a millionaire and other people are. That's what you chose.
I think that's right. And some of us have an easier path to it than others.
Yeah, I think that's true.
The accident of birth matters a lot here. But if you're in the United States and you're saying it ain't fair that that other guy got all the breaks and I didn't, everybody around the world is pointing at you saying the exact same thing. So try and keep it in perspective.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing because I talk about this 18-year-old earning $23,000 straight out of the gate.
That doesn't happen in Rwanda.
No, for the rest of the world, that's significantly above the median household income.
So you work all your life to get that if you're lucky.
Yeah.
The short answer here is stop whining. And of course, the short answer here of stop whining is perfect for this time of year because we're supposed to be giving thanks. And Thanksgiving is my all-time favorite holiday. Every element that a man could want in a holiday weekend. It's a 4-day weekend, which is way better than a 3-day weekend. And I never knew this until I worked at a bar. And here's a little bit of Harrigan trivia for you people out there. I worked as a DJ in a dance club. I happened to be at home on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and the bar owner called me and he said, "You need to get here right now." And when I got there, I found out that the Wednesday prior to Thanksgiving is the third biggest bar night of the year.
Is it really?
After only New Year's Eve and St. Patrick's Day.
Huh. Well, it's interesting. I used to work at a movie theater, and one of our biggest days was the day after Christmas, which you would think everybody's home. No. They're tired of their relatives by that point. They want to get out. So where they go to the movies.
Go to a place where you're not going to be talking for 2 hours.
Right.
Which is ideal. But anyway, the Thanksgiving is that time to sit back, relax, and remember why we work so hard. If luck has it this way, your family is with you, and hopefully some friends drift by too. It's that kind of day when we all stop and actually be thankful for a minute. Because if you're in the sound of my voice, you are living in unprecedented wealthy times. You should really be very thankful for that. I also know that I don't exhibit that thankfulness very often during the year. And then it's got two of the greatest things that any holiday has. The first thing is dinner. My God, Thanksgiving dinner is fantastic. Then the minute that you're done with your dinner, the football's starting. It's going to be fantastic.
And if you're a reasonable person, there's Star Trek reruns on Netflix. Remastered.
Idiot. I just don't understand how you can be like this. I just don't get it. God, man. Now I'm getting all agitated here just thinking about it.
See, you started off saying you were going to be nice because it's Thanksgiving. All it took was that little jab. That's what it takes, ladies and gentlemen, to push James over the edge.
And now I want you to shut your pie hole, and I want you to shut it real hard. I always want that, and I never actually get it. Because like a moron, you said, "James, we should do a podcast." And I said, and here we are. I have to listen to this garbage week in and week out. You're going to ruin my Thanksgiving. Now the wife is going to hear this, and they're going to be clamoring to watch Mr. Data on my TV instead of the ball game. Anyway, the two great things. And then there's this other thing, and that's with Thanksgiving, there are really no expectations. Come as you are. We're not dressing up. I mean, if anything, we dress down. You need stretchy pants, as my friend Tom Cranowiter said when he came over to my house for Thanksgiving. You need stretchy pants so you can make room for all that food. There's no expectation of gift giving. The fact that you came is sufficient. That's the important thing. And I think that's a really beautiful sentiment.
Yeah, it's very much about the people. It's not about something else, gifts or what have you.
And that kind of runs counter to the foolishness of the week. It seems to be the case, and I say this the day after a man drove a car and threw a parade in Wisconsin. Here's where it got foolish. I was talking to a friend over Facebook Messenger, and he told me to go look at it, that it was dreadful, and I did, and I thought, oh my God. And then I noticed no one had said anything about who the driver of the car was. And I thought, oh God, no matter who it is, it's going to become the political cause of the moment. Whoever it is going to become the poster boy for everything we hate. We're going to project it right onto that person. And if any of the events of the past month or two can tell you much of anything, it's that we are needlessly at each other's throats most of the time. We have some honest disagreements that I think are well worth arguing over. I thought, oh my God, I hope it's not a Muslim. And then I thought, oh God, I hope it's not a black guy. Because the case in Wisconsin had just been decided a couple of days earlier. And when you can think that way, when you can think, I hope it's not fill in the blank, the game is already lost. Things are polluted. And I have to say that was my first thought. I don't want it to be anyone, but given that it happened, we're probably going to have some problems. As a result, the foolishness this week is that that's how we all have been brought to think, and we probably owe it to ourselves and, more importantly, everyone else to start thinking about things a little differently.
For those of you who will be arguing about politics and the economy with your in-laws this holiday season, we encourage you to purchase a copy of our book, Cooperation and Coercion. It is the perfect antidote for the incorrect things that people confidently say. Cooperation and Coercion is available on Amazon, and the audio version is on Audible.
Yeah, and if you get the audio version and give that to somebody, that's kind of like going to the movies.
Yeah, you just stuff those earbuds in and you don't need to listen to anybody else.
Put the buds in and turn it on, and you don't have to listen to that guy's nonsense anymore.
You could listen to our nonsense.
And happy Thanksgiving. I hope it's as fantastic as it should be.
Happy Thanksgiving, James.
And happy Thanksgiving to all of you out there. And for the record, I'm thankful for most of you. One of you I'm not thankful for is Jerry Stein, who wrote after our last episode, Harrigan, you got it wrong. Roosevelt didn't say a chicken in every pot. It was attributed to Herbert Hoover, but he never actually said it either. His opponents took an advertisement out and put it on the advertisement. So it turns out that nobody was serious in saying this, and yet it entered the American lexicon just the same. So I've learned something. Jerry was right, of course, to point out that I was an idiot, and I will try to be less of one later. Jerry, if you're listening, thanks for writing.
From time to time, we ask our listeners to write in questions, which we then answer here on Words and Numbers. Last week was part 1 of our 2-part episode of answering listener questions, and today we bring you part 2.
Caitlin asks, what advice can you give someone just starting a career in academia? Run. Run now. Run far, run fast, run while you still have legs. Run. And she says her field is accounting, which means she could actually do pretty well in all kinds of other places. Run to those places.
Let me put some flesh on that. In higher ed, we've been talking, I say we, people in higher ed, have been talking for a long time about the coming demographic cliff. There's a decline in the number of people being born in the U.S., and so that's coming up in the next 5 years or so is a dramatic decline in the number of college-age students in the U.S. Combine that with rising tuitions, and I would not at all be surprised to see, 20% of colleges close over the next 2 decades because of those two things. In that sense, it may not be an industry that you want to get into now. However, if you're particularly interested in getting into it nonetheless, you've got to have a PhD unless you want to be an adjunct. I'm assuming here you want to be a full-time academic. You've got to have a PhD and decide whether you enjoy teaching or you enjoy doing research, because those are basically the two things. If you enjoy doing research, you need to go to a research institution where they don't care about your teaching. They just want you to produce articles. If you care about teaching, you need to go to a teaching institution that will make noise about caring about research, but really all they care about is the teaching. And you do that.
Everything Ant said is exactly right. But there's a level of protection that's offered the employee of the college if you're at a state school. State schools tend never to close down. And when we look at the colleges that we're shutting down now, there are mostly Bible colleges across the lower part of the United States and very good and expensive four-year liberal arts colleges.
I can give you a counterexample. Just 2 weeks ago, Pennsylvania announced that it was combining 3 of its state institutions into one. And there's a bunch of faculty who are going to be laid off because of this.
That's right. But that's by far the
rare
exception.
Yeah.
Now, it's going to become less rare over time because these are massive sinkholes that all the taxpayer money goes down. Take it from me as a man who thought that he was born to work at a small liberal arts college. Turns out that's just not right. I was not.
Jerry Stein says, Victor Davis Hanson recently published The Dying Citizen. He suggests we are transitioning from a nation of citizens to one of residents, where the advantage of being a resident has advantages over being a citizen. What do you think about that?
I think it's kind of interesting. Maybe it's for the best to start seeing things this way. I think it would certainly open the door to more reasonable kinds of immigration, That's always a problem. And I think this differentiation, if we could tell people, okay, you can come, we're not going to give you anything, but you can earn whatever it is you can earn, knock yourself out. And maybe after 5 or 10 years, you can become vested in Social Security or some such thing. Just come and you don't get to call yourself a citizen. I know a lot of people who would think that was a fine enough deal. I would probably go to countries, if that were the deal, I'd go camp out in places for a while. I haven't read Hanson's book, not this one anyway. I do know him to be reasonable. He's also a bit of an ideologue. I'm not uncomfortable with his work. I think it's solid.
Yanusz Domashek asks, if you could be a king for a day and could add only one amendment to the Constitution, what would it be?
Oh, that's easy. I would have an amendment that removed the 17th Amendment, and I would put the election of senators right back into state legislatures.
I've often thought about that as well. In fact, I wonder if it would be beneficial if the states somehow selected the Supreme Court justices rather than that coming through the federal government.
I'm not as convinced of that one, and here's why. How does a Supreme Court justice get on the court? Nominated by the president and what? Confirmed by the Senate. And if the Senate is still elected by the states, I've already achieved the thing you wanted.
Right.
And the Supreme Court is an interesting thing to consider in this respect. Any number of Supreme Court decisions prior to the 17th Amendment, which was in 1913, any number of their decisions took as given and used as bedrock the idea that the states sent senators in. And the minute you change that to a more popular form, all of those decisions now mean a completely different thing. And they were never revisited over time to say, okay, we've made a mess of this, how do we fix it? When you think about what it would be like to repeal the 17th Amendment, it gets fascinating because all kinds of things are touched by it.
We talk about checks and balances amongst the Congress, the president, and the Supreme Court. But there was another check and balance between the states and the federal government, and we gutted that with the 17th Amendment.
Absolutely. It's right in the thick of the progressive movement. We had a set of constitutional amendments that were progressive in nature, and this, I think, is the one I would change if I could. We got a strange question here from Andra, who we love. Can you give us cryptocurrency investment strategies? Oh, God, no. No, we can't. We can't
invest. I can give you one word. Don't.
I'm going to maybe expand it a little bit and say buy low, sell high. But if we were in a position to give people investment advice, we wouldn't be here right now.
Cryptocurrency is a great thing to play around with. I don't call playing around with things like that investment. I call it recreation. I certainly wouldn't. And I've been involved with crypto for a long time, maybe 5-10 years now. But I wouldn't call it investing, and certainly I don't treat it that way. I treat it as a fun thing to mess around with.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I look forward to the day when I can use my PayPal account to buy $18 worth of some crypto that then increases, 300,000% or something? I'm afraid I'm with you on the this is just goofing off kind of thing. It's the same amount of money I might bet on a football game.
George Burdell asks, what are your thoughts on issuing 100-year treasury bonds to help finance the debt with a coupon rate, let's say 2%? There's a thing, and why does the word escape me? Do you know the term, James? The British government issued bonds that were more than 100 years. They were infinite life bonds. The things never expired.
Good Lord.
There's a word for this. They issued them back like in the era of the Napoleonic Wars or something. And some of them are still out there.
They would have to all be out there, right?
No, because they could purchase them back.
I see.
They don't expire. So if you choose to hang on to yours, you hang on to it.
And when they purchase them back, they don't reissue them, I take it.
Yes, that's correct.
That part seems ridiculous knowing what I know about governments, but okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot to be gained here, particularly if you're making coupon payments here. Let's say it's a 2% coupon payment. So what that means is if you have loaned the government $1,000, for example, with a 2% coupon rate, the government would be paying you 2% a year every year for the next 100 years. And at the end of the 100 years, you get your $1,000 back. I don't know that it would change things that much. What I do think is that there would be few buyers for these things.
Yeah, I can't imagine who would want them.
Exactly. So consequently, to sell them, the government would have to sell them at a much lower price than it would otherwise, which means, in effect, you're getting more interest than you'd get on a 20-year bond. It's not obvious to me there's much to be gained here.
Who on earth would buy something that takes 100 years? Do you really want to tie up anything for 100 years? Do you trust government not to default on it anyway?
In a sense, you're not actually tying up your money for 100 years because at any point you could sell the bond. But the problem is, I got to find somebody who's willing to buy it. George goes on to ask, do you expect to see wage and price controls similar to what Nixon did in the 70s? I have an answer. I think it might be different than yours, so you go first.
I don't think that would be out of the realm of the possible. I think that that's actually a very possible outcome if we get spiraling inflation. Look, it's bad right now. This is the highest inflation we've had in decades, but it bears no resemblance to what we had in about 1981, 82. Even back from the Carter years to the Reagan years. It spans across maybe 4 of those years. So yeah, I think it could happen. Is it likely? Probably not, but it's not impossible.
My tendency is to think that it's not likely. I may overestimate Americans, but I can't imagine Americans standing for price controls. In fact, if you look historically, the only time in this country we have ever had a gas shortage, a shortage in the sense of an economist means it, that there's just simply no gas, is when we had price controls.
I want to emphasize that because I was a boy, so were you, when that happened. And I remember being in the car with my mother and my father waiting in line to buy gas.
Yeah.
And the lines were incredibly long. You were in for at least an hour if you were going to go wait in line. And there was no real guarantee that there were going to be any gas at all by the time you got to the front of the line. I remember every gas station in town had spray painted a giant cardboard sign and put it in the window. And it just said no gas. And you knew to keep going because there's nothing here for you. You could only buy gas on the days indicated by your license plate.
That's right. The odd even days.
In Connecticut, it was, I think, A through M in that last digit or 0 to 5 in that last digit. And that's what determined when you were even allowed to go to the gas station. And still, the lines were long and there was no gas.
Jeff Bortz says, on our last episode, you mentioned in passing peer review and said our listeners would not be interested in hearing about it. But Jeff says he is interested. And then on Words and Numbers Backstage, a bunch of people jumped in and said they want to hear about it as well. So,
bunch of weirdos. Bunch of weirdos.
Let's just give them an overview of what peer review looks like.
Yeah, sure. Let me start with my mother, because I remember when I was a freshly minted professor, I was working on an article, and my mother said, oh, for Time magazine or something like that? So you have to understand first what an article is, because it's nothing that the popular press would put out ever. So it's about 20 to 30 pages on balance that theoretically examines something that very few other people have examined or that you have an interesting angle on. Somehow you're supposed to be offering something that's a little different than everything that's been offered before. And you type up your thing and you read it and you show it to both of your friends and they say, yeah, this is good. And so you send it into a journal, an academic journal. And the editor at the journal decides something very important. He decides whether your article is worth even bothering with. And many, if not most, of the articles that people write are sent back with a note that, we're sorry, but this isn't for us. We wish you all the luck in the world publishing this nonsense somewhere else. The best journals have like a 7 to 10% acceptance rate. So you're up against bad odds here to begin with. After you go through that, the editor might well say, okay, this looks good. I'm going to send it out. And what he means is that he's going to send it out to 3 referees in your line of work. But it's blind. And the editor sends out 3 of them.
You don't know who they are, and he takes your name off the article. They don't know who you are.
Correct. It's allegedly a double-blind situation. It tends not to be, but that's the goal. The 3 referees read it, and there's only a few things they can decide. Should we publish this as it is? That almost never happens. Should we publish this with lots of revisions? And then they tell you what the revisions must be. That's common. Or should we not publish this at all? So you could be rejected on 2 different levels before you even get moving into the possibility category. And that's about how peer review works. Now, there is a big giant downside here. What if I write something that no one else has ever thought of? And that when I offer the very first cut, everybody says that's exactly the opposite of what I was taught, and there is no way that's correct. You might have possession of absolute truth, and you will not be able to publish it. And I submit that that actually happens quite a lot.
Yeah, and I think what encourages that kind of behavior is the fact that the peer reviewers are not employees of the journal. They're regular academics like the rest of us, and they're not paid.
That's right.
You're drafted. The editor will send you a note and say, hey, would you mind reviewing this thing? And you kind of have to review it. And what do you feel? Well, you can't just say yes because it looks like you haven't done anything. So you kind of deliberately look for things, well, this isn't right, that isn't right. And if it's something, as you say, that's novel, oh, well, I've never heard of this before, this must be wrong.
You're expected to review these things by your host institution. So Ant works at Duquesne. Duquesne kind of expects him to remain involved in the discipline, and being a peer reviewer is a way to remain in the discipline, to remain involved. But I can give you a personal example. Our friend Phil Magnus and I wrote an academic article about John Keynes and about how his eugenics stood at the center of his economic theory. For any of his economic theory to work, we concluded, the eugenics piece had to be front and center, meaning that he had to cause or allow large numbers of people to die. You can imagine when you say something like John Maynard Keynes is a murderer or would be, you don't get a lot of friendly responses from the academy.
Right.
Why? If you're a Keynesian and now we're telling you that would make you a murderer for this to work, you're going to react very unfavorably to an article that makes this point. And so it was. We sent the article in and we heard back from the editor and he said, well, isn't this something? Let's send it out. And 2 of the referees said that it was excellent, which is exactly what you want to hear. Did they require a whole lot by way of revision? No, almost nothing. They said this is good as it is.
That's rare.
Then there was that last referee who called it stupid and foolish, how it ran afoul of everything we actually know. And now it becomes an editor's choice. And the editor of the journal said, well, you couldn't bring the third guy around, but I think it's worth it, and 2 other guys do too. We're going to run it. But imagine if 2 of the 3 referees said, no, this is crazy.
2 of the 3 reviewers, right. Or imagine if the editor, as many editors do with something controversial like that, says, well, one guy said it's bad, so we're not going to publish it.
And that's known in the industry as a desk rejection. It's the worst kind, because you don't even know for sure that anybody read it. Now, reading referee number 3's comments, I'm pretty sure he only read like 4 pages of the thing. But this is peer review. And if you get into the sciences, it's even worse because you'll have a scientific truth out there that everybody, and I'm quoting in the air, knows. Most people think that the next paper on that is a replication of a process, right? That we learned this great thing, this scientific invention, and then somebody else is going to come along and do the exact same work and see if the conclusion holds. It's not that at all. It's hard for me to make a case in favor of peer review. It's gotten so ridiculous. And that article that Phil and I published took 2 years. It took 2 years after we were done writing it.
We should say what peer review is not. It is not a replication. If I go out and collect data and write an article on the effect of the minimum wage on unemployment, and it goes to reviewers, the reviewers are not checking my work. Ideally, they should be checking my math and looking at my data and all of that, but typically that's not what goes on. Certainly, they aren't replicating it by running their own study and saying, verily, my study agrees with this. It's not replication. It's simply the guy looking at it and saying, yeah, this seems reasonable or it doesn't. Another interesting thing about academic journals in general is that it's academics talking to academics. And even then, the number of people who will read your article are incredibly small.
It's vanishingly small.
We're talking tens, maybe. If it's really successful, 100 people will read it.
Oh, if that. Oh, God, 100. And I'm convinced that I've written things that the only people who read it were the reviewers, which leaves you at 4. And if you're looking to make a dent in the problems of the world, you're going to have to find another way.
Jesse asks, are you guys still planning to run for the 2024 presidency?
Yeah, no.
Tell them why, James.
I guess I should explain. Yeah, no, when we were thinking about doing that, we were dealing with one set of circumstances as quote unquote reality for us. And it didn't include any notion that I might move to a place like AIER, the American Institute for Economic Research. The reason why we were talking about running for president was to show people the path forward. I no longer have the time. I think I can make a bigger dent at AIER than I ever could trying to become the libertarian candidate for president. And Ant and I really dug into this, and it turns out there's so much to it that I don't know if we could have even managed it in the first place.
Michael Popescu asks, what was the original purpose of the Federal Reserve, and does it serve any meaningful purpose today? The original purpose of the Federal Reserve was to act as the lender of last resort. So think back to the Great Depression where we had runs on banks. So this was before electronic currency and even largely before checks. I mean, checks existed, but the regular people didn't use checks. Regular people used cash. And so you're in a situation where people are going to the bank to draw their money out. This is their money, right? It's the only form of money people have, so much so that the banks run out of money. And that causes people to panic, and they run to their banks and pull out all the money, causes their banks to now become insolvent. And so you get this domino effect of all of these banks now not having money to give to people, and people go bananas. It would be as if today you logged into your online bank or into your PayPal account or whatever it was, and they said, sorry, we don't have any money to give you, right? What are you going to do at this point? And so the Federal Reserve was founded in large part to act as the lender of last resort, that if this happened again, the Federal Reserve would make whatever liquidity was necessary available to the banks so that people could get their money. And indeed, in 1987, when we had a crash that was percentage-wise worse than the crash of 1929, the first thing that happened, Alan Greenspan got on the news that day and said the Federal Reserve stands ready to provide whatever liquidity is necessary to markets. And people said, oh, okay, there's no need to rush to the bank and withdraw my money. The Federal Reserve is going to make liquidity available. And what happened? Well, because of that and several other things that we didn't do in 1929, within the course of maybe 3 months, you wouldn't have known there was ever a stock market crash. And that was a crash that was worse percentage-wise than 1929. Now, what does the Federal Reserve do today? Well, it does the same thing along with a bunch of other things. But interestingly, one of the things that it is coming to do, kind of by default, is to act as the lender of last resort to the federal government. That we're in a situation where the federal government has borrowed so much money, it's kind of running out of places to borrow. And so the Federal Reserve stands ready to loan whatever it is that the federal government needs to borrow. And you can look at the numbers here. The fraction of the federal debt owned by the Federal Reserve is roughly double today what it was 20 years ago.
Donovan Biggs asks, does the federal government have the right to tax gains on currency exchanges? Of course it does. Who says so? It does.
Right. Just ask it. It'll tell you.
That's right. You get remarkably similar answers over time if you keep asking the same question. How is it treated? It's treated as a capital gain. So if you bought a stock and the stock doubled in value over time, you're going to be taxed on the amount of profit you made. So too with capital gains with currency. And it is exactly the same as capital gains. How does it tie in with cryptocurrency is the more interesting part of the question. Right now, it figures in crypto the exact same way that it figures if you had invested in euros and made a killing. Most currencies don't fluctuate that much. You can't really make a whole lot of money unless you've got a lot at risk. Is it going to continue to be the case that gains in crypto are capital gains? That I don't know. I suspect yes over the long term. And now you're seeing places like Coinbase giving the government the data that it would need to come after you if you didn't file appropriately. Make sure you admit that you made some money because they'll come looking for you for that and more if you fail to mention it. That's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Be sure to join us next week for even more. I'm going to try and keep my word. I tell all the people to be nice to each other. I'm going to try and be nice to you. I know I don't try it often, but you really are a great friend and I appreciate you. So there you go.
How about that? That was very kind.
The rest of you should be every bit as nice as I just was, but honestly, it probably hurts my heart more than you can imagine to be nice to Anthony. Anyway, we'll be back next week. You can follow us on Twitter. Handles are in the show notes, as always. And
we thank you for your questions, and we apologize to those we didn't get to. They were all very good. But if you would like to have us answer further questions, please send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
The correct answer is join Words and Numbers Backstage. Find out when the meet and greet or the public-facing events, the Zoom calls are happening, and come on by, say hello, and ask your questions there. Ant, I'll see you next week.
See you next week, James.